Okay, next up will be Genesis chapter 25.
Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bare him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. And Jokshan begat Sheba, and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Asherim, and Letushim, and Lumim. And the sons of Midian, Ephah, and Epher, and Hanok, and Abida, and Eldah. All these were the children of Keturah.
Now, as chapter 25 begins, you hear something that you may not have been aware of, right? Because this wasn't necessarily that publicized, I don't think, in the story of Abraham. You hear about Abraham and Sarah, and then their son Isaac and so forth, right? But now Sarah has passed away, so it says Abraham took another wife, right? So which is nothing wrong with that. Your wife has died, so he took another wife, right, named Keturah, right? And she didn't have, I guess, the same problems with reproduction that Sarah had, right? Where Sarah had to wait until she was 90 years old, and God had to miraculously deliver a baby, right? Here, this woman had no problem reproducing. So you see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 kids, right here, right? And Abraham is 140, right? So he's still able to make babies apparently, right? And so it's just kind of going through the names for the sake of the record keeping, all right, of who were the now 6 other children of Abraham through this other woman, and then in some cases who they fathered and such. So you can see Abraham's family was expanding in another direction, but yet still remembering that Isaac is still the chosen one, right? That's still where God's blessing is going to be on that family, right? Abraham to Isaac to whoever comes next, all right? These other ones are all just extras, right? So yes, I mean, they have a blessing, but not the blessing that was reserved for Isaac.
And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. But unto the sons of the concubines, which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived, eastward unto the east country.
So even from a standpoint of belongings, all right, or riches or wealth or whatever, Abraham left everything to Isaac, okay? And what we would call a will today. You make a will and you leave something to to this child or that child or this relative. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't as legal as it is today in terms of there was no lawyers or anything, but yet in whatever way they did it, and I'm sure he had to at least write down in some way that all my wealth goes to Isaac, right? That's the whole saying, is that even though he's having all these other children, right, that they're not the ones that are going to be the official son of Abraham, right? They're just extras. So I'm sure he's not leaving them destitute, but he says he gave them gifts here in verse 6, gave them gifts and sent them away, all right, when they were, I guess, old enough to be sent on their way. So they, let's go ahead and live, set up your home wherever you want to, all right, and here's a gift to help you out, all right, but pretty much the bulk of his estate, if you will, was going to be left for Isaac, because Isaac was the one with the blessing of God.
And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 160 years. Then Abraham gave up the ghost, and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre. The field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, there was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well Lahairoi.
It says that Abraham lived a long life. Okay, so now he was old and he died. He was 175 years old when he died, right? And of course, as we've seen, I mean, people did live to longer or older ages than they do today. But but still, it's getting shorter and shorter as it's approaching the ages that we're accustomed to today. And so, as it says here, he lived to be old. So even for that time, 175 was now old. Right? It was considered that he lived a long life. So he lived to 175. The main thing was that he had fathered Isaac, which was the main purpose he was called to do, and now as well as these other ones as well, right? But he says he lived a long life. He died in a good old age. And now in verse 8 it says he was gathered to his people. When it says he was gathered to his people, right? I mean, yeah, he joined his people who had already died, All right, so in essence, he went on to, today we refer to it as paradise. All right, he went on to paradise, all right, or to whatever waiting place to await the resurrection. All right. Now, some believe there were other waiting places and not paradise, but our understanding from the Book of Mormon is that paradise is the waiting place for somebody who's righteous. All right, so that therefore he was in paradise awaiting the resurrection of Christ. All right, because when Christ resurrected, it says then everybody else that died before him resurrected. Right, and we're seeing some were seen walking the streets of the holy city and such. So I would guess Abraham was probably one of the ones seen walking the holy city then in Matthew chapter 26. Right, so because Abraham was gathered to his people, so yeah, he joined his people who had gone on before at this time when he died. Right, and in a few verses we're going to hear of others that died, and so the same phrase is used, but this was the first time it's used in the Old Testament, gathered to his people. So it gives you some indication that he didn't just die and he's dead, right? He's gone on somewhere, right? His soul has moved on to be with the souls of the other people who were his family, loved ones, whatever, who had already gone on before. Now, having done that, if you remember a few chapters ago, we read about when Sarah had died, that Abraham went and worked out a deal to get a cave for her to be buried in, and got it off the ungodly person, and they wanted to give it to him for free, and he said, no, I want to pay for it. And so there was a whole story about how he obtained that cave. Right? Well, yeah, he was getting it for himself as well, which we mentioned back then. So here his wife Sarah is buried there, and now he's buried there as well. Right? That's why it says that his sons Isaac and Ishmael. Remember Ishmael from way back, all right, was actually the older son, the one that was born from Sarah's maid Hagar, right, had Ishmael. So Ishmael apparently was notified that Abraham had died, so he came back with Isaac, I guess, for whatever funeral they were going to have. And so between them, they buried him in the cave, right, where Sarah was buried. And it's just tenants were calling you. This is the field which Abraham purchased, right? There was Abraham buried with Sarah, his wife. All right, so it was worked out that way ahead of time. Abraham had acquired almost like a family plot, if you will, and so he was able to be buried there along with his wife Sarah. Right, and then just makes a point in 11 to say that after the death of Abraham, says God blessed Isaac because now Isaac is now carrying the torch. Right, so up until now, as I mentioned earlier, the story was about Abraham. It was Abraham and his family. Well, now Abraham is gone, so now it's about Isaac and the family. So now Isaac is blessed by God to continue on carrying this blessing of God.
Now these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names, according to the generations: the firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, and Kedar, and Adbeel, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Dumah, and Massa, Hadar, and Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, some verses and the parts of chapters are intended, just for like record keeping to kind of show you, who belonged to who or whatever, right? And so this is part of that, all right? Now, but since Ishmael was mentioned, all right, is coming back for Abraham's funeral, so now it's almost like, oh, by the way, just in case you're ever wondering what happened to Ishmael, all right? Well, here's a little bit what happened. It says that he went on and he was married, and he had sons of his own, right? And then here's 12 sons mentioned here in verses 13, 14, and 15, right? So these are the sons of Ishmael. If you count them up, there were 12, right? Which it was said that there'd be like 12 nations were going to come out of him, and so these were the 12, that they were each going to make families of their own and have lots of descendants. And so Ishmael was also blessed by God. Again, not the blessing of Isaac, but he was blessed by God nonetheless, right? It's showing you here these were the sons born from Ishmael, and then who was going to be the head of each of those families going forward.
These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names, by their towns and by their castles, 12 princes according to their nations. And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, and he gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people. And they dwelt from Havilah unto Shur, that is before Egypt, as thou goest toward Assyria, and he died in the presence of all his brethren.
Right, so 16 is mentioned what I said earlier, right? That this is listed all the names of the sons of Ishmael. 12 altogether. That's why it says it's calling them 12 princes according to their nations, because each one was going to have like a whole nation of people come out of them, all right? So he was leaving behind a large legacy, a large family, right? And it mentions now the death of Ishmael. He lived to be 137 years old, not quite as old as Abraham, but nonetheless, 100 plus years that he lived, right? And it says, it says he gave up the ghost and died and was gathered unto his people, right? The same phrase that we just saw earlier. So wherever he was going, he was off to join his people in the next life. So it says where he died, right? He died in the presence of his family, right? And so, again, in case you're wondering what happened to Ishmael, so it mentions here these were all his children. This is where he died. This is how old he was. So it just kind of closes that loop, right? So if you remember in an earlier chapter, we had him just kind of go off and disappear, right? So this kind of closes the loop. It says, he had a life, he had a family, he had a death, and this is how the story of Ishmael wraps up.
And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Paddan Aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife, because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived.
We just read, here are the generations of Ishmael, all right, and it has 12 sons, right? It says now here are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son, right? Is nothing yet, right? So it's interesting that it's going to even phrase it that way, right? As if it's now we're going to lay out his family. Well, there's nothing yet, right? It says Abraham begot Isaac, and that's it, right? It says Abraham was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, right? The story we just read in the previous chapter, the daughter of Bethuel, the sister of Laban, right? But it says in 21, Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. So she had no children yet. So I guess they were trying to have children, but they hadn't had children. So he was praying that something would happen. And then here at the end of verse 21, it says Rebekah, his wife, conceived. So the prayer was answered as she finally became pregnant, and she was finally going to bring forth their first child, right? So, and I believe it says somewhere else that this was after 20 years, by the way, right? So whereas he was 40 when he married her, now he's 60, right? And it doesn't say how old she was, because so she might have been younger, right? But still, it took 20 years for them to actually be able to conceive, so that they could actually bring forth any children at all.
And the children struggled together within her, and she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger.
All right, so now Rebekah is expecting, right? And so I guess it seems to her something's going on inside me, right? It's like there's almost like a fight going on inside me, which leads you to believe there's more than one baby in there, all right? So it says the children struggled together within her, all right? And she said, "What's going on?" All right? And she prayed to the Lord, "What is this?" All right? I feel like there's a fight going on inside me, and you see the Lord's response in verse 23. It says, "The Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in your womb." In other words, not literally 2 nations, but 2 babies that are going to turn into nations, all right? So in other words, but they'll be separate. So there is going to be some contention between them as they grow and as their families are fleshed out, all right? And so it says 2 nations in your womb, 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. In other words, when you give birth to these two, they're going to be very different kinds of people. All right, it says that the one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So in other words, that the one that's going to be really, it says one will be stronger than the other, all right? And not saying which one is going to be stronger than the other, but in the end, the older one's going to serve the younger. In other words, the younger one is going to really be the lead in this, all right? So God's telling what's going to happen, all right? That there's going to be two babies, 2 children, going to turn into 2 nations. One is going to be stronger than the other, but the older will serve the younger. So the younger is going to be the lead one when it all shakes out. So a lot of prophecy being delivered to her here about what's going to happen in the future.
When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 old when she bare them.
All right, so finally the time comes to deliver the baby, or in this case, the babies. All right, and so it's 24, you see, it says that there were twins, all right, which of course had been hinted in the previous verses, all right, it says there were twins in her womb. It says the first came out red, it's all over like a hairy garment, like a hairy looking baby, right, and so they called his name Esau. And then it said now 26, after that came his brother out, so that, so there is a clear one older than the other, even though maybe it's only minutes different, but yet, but still, like when you consider the whole way it worked, that the oldest son had a lot of rights as the oldest son, so it made a big difference which one came out first, even if it was only minutes different, but yet he was the first one out, so that made him the oldest one, which gave him a lot of rights within the family. All right, so he came out first, and then this is, then came his brother, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, almost like he was trying to drag him back, right? Wait, wait, I want to come out first, right? So it says his hand was on his heel, so actually it may not even been minutes, maybe been seconds, right? It may come out one after the other, because his hand was on the heel of the older one as he was coming out, all right? And so that one was named Jacob, all right? So Esau and Jacob were the twins. Esau the older by just seconds, all right, but Jacob hanging onto the heel as he was coming out, and then it just throws in the point that Isaac was 80 old at this point, which we know means he was 60, right? So whereas he was 40 when they got married, now he's 60. That's where I mentioned earlier that it was 20 years until they were able to have any children, and now they had two, all right, Esau and Jacob. So here's Esau, and there's Jacob. Okay. Okay, so we've added Esau and Jacob to the chart, coming from Isaac, all right, and again, that's an important lineage because, again, remember, this is the lineage blessed by God, right? It started with the promise to Abraham that he would be a father of many nations, right? And then he said all along that Isaac was the one that the blessing was going to carry through, and so now Isaac and Rebekah have given birth to Esau and Jacob, and so clearly now it's going to pass to that level.
And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob.
Now it says, of course the boys grew up, all right, and it's now telling you a little bit about them, all right. So he says the boys grew. Esau was the hunter, a man in the fields, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents, all right. So he was more of a stay-at-home kind of guy, and Esau was he was the hairy one, if you remember, right? He's out there in the field hunting and killing deer and bringing back venison. That's why it says Isaac, that was his favorite, right? Esau was his favorite. And he said he's the hunter. He's going to get all the good food for us. So yeah, he's my favorite. But but Rebekah preferred Jacob. And interesting, right? I mean, because he was the mama's boy, right? So so they each had their favorites. Isaac preferred Esau, but Rebekah preferred Jacob, all right? And so now again, perhaps it was because she knew of that prophecy that we said earlier. This is the older will serve the younger, right? But yet, I think she just liked him better because he was home all the time, and the other one was out hunting all the time. He was more the rough one, and Jacob was the more gentle one.
And Jacob sawed pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint." Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, "Sell me this day thy birthright." And Esau said, "Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me?" And Jacob said, "Swear to me this day." And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright.
So here at the end of this chapter, it's an interesting episode between Esau and Jacob, the brothers, that again shows you their respective personalities and what was important to them. It starts out where it says that Jacob was at home in the tent. He was making pottage. He was making dinner. Right, and here Esau was out in the field working, doing what he did, and hunting, whatever it was that he was doing, and he came home. It says that he was hungry. In fact, it says he was faint. Right, so he says to Jacob, "Feed me. I want dinner. I need dinner. Can I have some of what you're making?" And now, whether it was normal he was going to get it or not, or whether he was impatient, or it's not clear, but the point was he saw what Jacob was making for dinner, and he said, yeah, I'm like starving, I gotta eat right now. So Jacob, in thinking quick, makes an interesting request. He says, well, sell me this day your birthright, and then I'll give you dinner. So here he's offering a trade. Trade me your birthright for your dinner. Now, if Esau was really understanding what the birthright meant, I mean, that would be like a silly thing to ask for. I mean, the birthright carried a lot of rights that went with it. It was his rights associated with being the firstborn of the family. And the firstborn got a lot of rights, right? That the genealogy would go through him. The inheritances would primarily go to him. So it was a lot of rights that went with being the firstborn. So for him to give that away for one dinner would actually seem quite silly, right? But his reasoning, at least according to what's written here, says in 32, he says, behold, I'm at the point to die, right? I'm like ready to die here because I don't have food, so what good's a birthright to me if I die right now? So he really apparently thought it's more important for me to have dinner right now than to worry about having a birthright. So Jacob said, well, if you're willing, then let's make it official. Right? Now, again, I don't know how they did the act of making it official, but it says, Jacob says, swear to me this day, and he sware unto him and sold his birthright to Jacob. So again, however they did it, through whatever system of agreements or whatever it was they had to say, you know, as of today, you're considered the oldest, right? He gave him his birthright in exchange for this dinner. Now, as I said earlier, it would seem kind of silly to have done that, and clearly Esau is not thinking clearly in terms of what he's giving up for this particular dinner, right? And so that's why in 34 it says that, right at the end. It says, thus Esau despised his birthright, right? That's because Jacob gave Esau bread, pottage of lentils, and he ate and drank and got up and went his way, right? Good, I'm happy, all right? I made a good trade today. I went ahead and got a good dinner here, and all it cost me was this birthright, which didn't mean anything to me anyway. Right? And that's an important point, is that, you know, lest you might feel sorry for Esau later and say, oh, the poor guy, he was the firstborn, and he didn't get the rights of being the firstborn, and maybe his brother tricked him out of it or caught him in a weak moment, but it says Esau despised his birthright, so it meant nothing to him. He was willing to give it up for one dinner, and so he did, and then Jacob now is considered the one with the birthright as if he had been the firstborn. And of course it plays into what was said to Rebekah earlier, even while she was pregnant, that it said that the older would serve the younger, right? That this is a step toward that happening. Now, I mean, I've read some places where they say, well, Jacob didn't necessarily need to resort to trickery or bargaining to get the birthright because it was already intended that he would be the one in charge, or the one that the older would serve the younger. That God already had that in the plan, so that, again, I don't know how that would have happened, or whether this was, in fact, part of God's plan, but however it was intended to be, at this point, Jacob is considered to be the one with the birthright, so all the rights of being the firstborn will go to him.